structure is really the king of all the things you can do as a leader. So if, like you said, there's so many times where it feels like we're given these messages from movies or from the things we really see leaders doing and remember, like these motivational speeches. You always see the great pregame speech or the great halftime speech. And that's what, we get shown. Now we get shown it on TV, but certainly that's a part in the movies or TV shows when we think about the great team leader, that's what they're going to do. But those are far less important than the structure of the group. And it's not really even close. So the first thing you have to do is think about, what is this team for? What's our goal going to be? Why are we assembling a team in the first place? What do we want to achieve? And we need to get that as clear as we can in our own minds so we can communicate it to other people.
Today's episode sponsor is Aditon, creators of Aditon Operations Kit, the military's go-to software for personnel and equipment accountability. AOK goes where you do, any network, anytime, any place. I got to know Aditon's co-founders, James and JJ, several years ago. They are former Army NCOs who have years of experience in the tech industry. They understand that most military jobs aren't performed behind a computer desk. Personnel and operations are distributed, but accountability of property is paramount to making mission. That's where Logi, AOK's equipment management software, comes into play. Formerly known as 92X, Logi is a next generation of equipment management for the military. Logi offers unrivaled features for military teams on the go. Ingest and digitize your primary and sub-hand receipts. Generate and share sub-hand receipts and DA forms with your team in just a few clicks. Capture photos, tags, and notes across your team to build context on the state of equipment. Get easy on-the-go access to critical property records. Logi is custom built for the modern military professional. It gives you your valuable time back so you can get back to the mission at hand at home or in the field. Whether you're doing monthly inventories or preparing for deployment, Logi is your pocket property book, giving you real-time visibility into equipment status and mission readiness. Logi is currently in use across the U.S. Army Special Forces, and it's expanding. For a limited time, listeners of the From the Green Notebook podcast can try out Logi for free. Visit aditonppc.com/FTGN-Logi to get started. That's ADYTONPBC.com/FTGN-LOGE. How do I know what I think until I see what I say?
The Green Notebook, carried by military leaders around the world. Within those pages are sweat, tears, triumphs, and the hard-won lessons of life. Lessons worth sharing. Each week, the team dives into the notebooks of military leaders, business professionals, authors, athletes and coaches, and entertainers to share lessons and help you lead with the best version of yourself.
Welcome to another episode of From the Green Notebook. I'm your host, Joe Byerly, and today we're opening up the Green Notebook of author Dr. Colin Fisher. Dr. Fisher is the author of The Collective Edge, Unlocking the Secret Power of Groups, a book that reveals how the hidden forces of groups shape performance, culture, and leadership more than most of us realize. I've been telling friends and former teammates, this book is one I wish I would have read before I took command because it shows the science behind how to build stronger and more deliberate teams. In this conversation, we explore themes that leaders in every field need to understand. We talk about why this sorting hat and not Voldemort might be the real villain of Harry Potter and what that says about group identity, how the myth of the lone genius hides the reality that even Newton and Edison were shaped by collaboration, what synergy really means and why structure, not speeches, is a leader's most powerful tool, the dark side of teams, how norms, conformity, and silence can drive dysfunction or even disaster, and why psychological safety isn't about harmony, but about the freedom to question, disagree, and innovate. So Dr. Fisher, in this episode, he challenges us to see leadership not just as an individual act, but as the art of shaping the invisible forces that push groups towards success or failure. So whether you're leading soldiers in the field, managing a corporate team, or navigating group life in everyday settings, this episode will open your eyes to dynamics you've probably felt but never fully understood. So grab your green notebooks and please welcome to the show, Dr. Colin Fisher.
Thanks so much for having me, Joe. It's a pleasure to be here.
Well, Colin, it's a funny story I want to share with you. So, I had a copy of the book. I had a ton of work stuff, other like work stuff going on, and I didn't get a chance to read it. And then I remembered, oh my gosh, I got this interview in 2 weeks. I hope I can quickly get through the book. And in the first couple sentences, when you name the real bad guy of the Harry Potter movies, I was like, I think I can do this. And it turns out, I was telling a friend this morning that this is one of the books on group dynamics where I was introduced to a lot of new material that I had never seen before. So this was very easy to do in just a couple days.
Well, great. I'm glad it grabbed you, Joe. You know, we worked hard on that first line, and honestly, it's all the truth. Like I went through reading a bunch of Harry Potter thinking there was something wrong with the Sorting Hat. So it was I was suspicious of that the whole time.
Yeah, so let's, for those who are interested in picking up the book, let's begin there. Why do you think the Sorting Hat is the bad guy of the Harry Potter movies?
Well, like I as I said in the book, like I really legitimately, when the Sorting Hat was introduced and it's put onto your head, for those who don't know, you put the Sorting Hat on the head of an 11-year-old and it reads what's in your head, and then it sorts you into one of these 4 houses based on your traits. And I didn't even have a PhD or hadn't started studying this stuff when I read those books. Obviously, I'm not quite that old. And the idea of doing that seemed kind of vaguely sinister to me. And then as I kept reading the book, it's once you're sorted into these houses, no one ever leaves, right? So you're 11 years old, they take you and they say, here's what's in your head. This is the group you belong in. And then those sortings, the difference between Gryffindor and Slytherin and Ravenclaw and Hufflepuff, those are the lines that, the wars that are in the books are basically drawn upon. And so, when you're looking at the kind of more structural causes of all of the conflict we see in this group, to me, it really comes back to putting all these 11-year-olds into these immutable categories and deciding that they have to compete against each other and be in constant rivalry and with one another from a very young age, which, as I said, seems vaguely sinister. I think I exaggerate a little in the book to say it's the real villain, but I think it certainly wasn't a good thing.
Yeah, and I think what's interesting is, I saw the movies and I read the book when I was younger. And again, it's this idea of good versus evil, Harry Potter versus Voldemort. But then now, just thinking about it, there's so many group dynamics that were in play in all of this. And like you said, kind of driving that conflict. So why is it so hard for us to see how group dynamics play out in our own lives?
I think group dynamics are hard to see because in some level they're so obvious, right? Like it's a part of our everyday experience when we wake up, and whether you're with your family or you're with roommates, there are group dynamics there that we just kind of automatically adjust to, that we don't behave the same way in one group as in another. And that's because our brains, are wired to want to fit in. That one of the deepest fear, if you were a prehistoric human, was that you were going to be ostracized and kicked out of your group. And so it's a very deep, deep part of us that's sort of pushing us to conform, that's helping us sort of pick up on the social norms of being in one group versus another. And that those influences we carry with us no matter what. That even when we think about different groups, we think about our different identities, our work identity, our family identity, our social and other kinds of hobbies. We can even change ourselves just by thinking about different groups that we're a member of, even if those people aren't there. So it's such an integral part of being human that I think we kind of fail to pick up on it most of the time.
Yeah, and I think too, which you talk about in the book as well, is this idea of lone genius. Like I like to attribute things not to the group, but to the individual person. And the more and more I read over the years, like you talk about Edison, like Edison was working with a group of people, having conversations, going back and forth with ideas, and he was even building upon previous ideas. I just did an interview last episode that I recorded with Roland Allen, the guy who wrote the history of the Notebook, and he even talks about how Sir Isaac Newton wanted to display himself as a lone genius. Apple falls out of the tree, but as they went back and dove into his notebooks, that what they saw was he was even playing with ideas and written by other thinkers during that time. And then that's where it's that back and forth is where you start getting some of his laws. And so I think that, there is that aspect that's what we focus on, and we never take an actual step back, even in our own lives, of how did a group or how did other individuals influence what I do, what I don't do, what I wear, what I don't wear. And I think, again, reading this book kind of opens your eyes to, what role is the group, the groups that I belong to playing in my own life.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, that's completely why I wrote the book, is that, usually when you're walking down the leadership or the self-help aisle of the bookstore, you see a lot of these kind of stories of great individuals, biographies, memoirs, great individual leaders kind of telling you how they did it on their own. And of course, there's a lot to be learned from studying people who've accomplished great things, but it's kind of ironic that being part of groups is so integral to being human, and yet the way we kind of make sense of the world is very individualistic. And that's partially because we experience things on our own. We can't directly experience the thoughts and feelings of other people, and that so we sort of think about our own experience as being very causal, right? The things that we do, the things that we have done are what's causing us to have the outcomes we have in life. And the world's just more complicated than that, that groups are always at play, even in the greatest minds of whether we're talking about Isaac Newton or Thomas Edison or any discovery that you really start to dig into, any great leader that you really start to dig into their story, you're going to find a group underneath that. And that the people we remember often were a little bit better at marketing themselves, and also are convenient handles for us to kind of pull up these lessons by. So, it's helpful for us to pull up some of the lessons about the light bulb or about physics from Thomas Newton or Thomas Edison or Isaac Newton. But when we really want to use that information for ourselves as leaders or as members of teams, we actually need a much more comprehensive view of how groups are at play, because if we can't rally this kind of collaboration and group dynamics to our cause, we're probably not going to get those same results.
Well, I want to, and I want to talk about achieving results, but I want to say one thing. And for people who listen to every episode, I apologize because I bring this up all the time. I think it's so important. And I used it throughout my time in leading an organization. But this idea of group identity, and one of my favorite authors, Seth Godin, has a saying. He says, "People like us do things like this," and it's on normally I wear the shirt on the podcast too that says "People like us" on the front, and do things like this on the back that we have in our store. But he says that from the moment we're born to the day we die, every decision we make, everything that we do, is run through that internal lens, is do people like us do things like this? And it's that idea of wanting to belong to a group, a tribe, that, like you talk about, it's so wired into our Paleolithic brains that, even the books we read, the people we associate with, the movies we watch are all a part of this group identity that we don't even think about. And so in his context, it's a marketing book. And so he's talking about, marketing to that tribe, that specific tribe. But again, it just highlights that, and when I was in command, I would say that we're going to do these things. We're going to compete against each other. We're going to drive each other to be better because people like us do things like this. It was a mantra that we said all the time. And so, again, it's the, you bring all this to kind of the surface of the brain so you can start paying attention to it in the world around you.
Yeah, I mean, in a way, so I love that. I love that that was such a great mantra for you, and I think it's completely true that right that how you think of yourself, like what is a person like me going to do in this situation. I had a chapter that ended up getting cut from the book that was about when I played football in high school. I believe it or not, I was a defensive lineman. I had a lot more heft to me back then. And the I was this was quite a long time ago. So I'm are you a fan of of
Yes.
American football?
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So this was back before running quarterbacks were popular, and we were playing against a rival team, and the quarterback was this young, he was a year younger than me. Name was Marcus Tuiasosopo, and he was known as a running quarterback. He went on to play for the
Yeah.
Raiders in the NFL, but no, we didn't know, so we had a spy, and I was a spy, so I was the one who was supposed to follow him around if he ran. Very first play, he literally broke my ankle. So I was trying to chase him outside. He juked me, and I twisted my ankle. I didn't know it was broken at the time. And so, then on the sidelines, I'm going, well, what does somebody who like me, who thought of himself as as a team leader, as somebody who's, a senior now and being dedicated to this team, what do they do? They go back in the game and they try and play, right? No matter what. And so I, hobble back out there on this broken ankle, even though at this point I know this is my last year playing football, that was probably the last play, in fact, for me,
Right.
given what had happened. But so it's, I was a smart guy. I'm rational. I knew that this was not in my best interests, but this was, what is someone like me going to do in that situation? And so it's, no matter how, rational or wise or anything else we are, that's governing our behavior, that same mantra. And that it's not only at the kind of, root of things like marketing, as you say, but like if we look in the back of some other, really great books, so I'll shout out the Atomic Habits, which is the same publisher as my book, for another Avery book. And if there's like just a few pages where it's like, oh yeah, and all these people with great habits also were part of groups of other people who wanted to have those great habits. These chess masters, these Olympic athletes, they all joined these groups to like keep pushing themselves to their utmost. And so many books that are about individual improvement have, a little section at the back that's about, oh yeah, and you should join a group. And to me, I was like, well, that's almost backwards. That the first thing we want to think about is, what kind of person do I want to be, and how can I become part of actual groups and actual teams with those same kind of people that I want to be, that I aspire to be more like, and that we can push each other to get better and better and better. And that was a big part of the impetus to write the book, is feeling like people mention groups and their importance, but it often gets kind of marginalized in this conversation about how we're going to improve both ourselves and our organizations and the world.
Yeah. Well, I want to jump forward because what we're talking about are the benefits of groups. And, like one of the things that I remember hearing a lot, and it became like a joke in movies, was this term synergy. And so, I thought for the longest time that it was like something magical. Like if you just had the right people and you had the right leader giving motivational speeches, that like, groups would achieve this, synergy, or basically just working well together. But like what you found is that there's actual things that you can do in organizing. Like I'll stop there, but things that you can do as a leader to achieve synergy. So the first thing is, what is synergy? And two, if I'm in charge of a group or a team, what can I do to achieve that?
Yeah, I mean, it's such an important question. And like I always kind of two minds about using the word synergy because it has become such an almost like cliche buzzword. But like it literally is when groups are more than the sum of their parts. So that if we just add up the contributions of individual members, we're not going to get what we would if we actually see the final group product. And there's, I think, most of the time where it's really worth using groups, what we're really looking for is synergy. That when we get people who have different roles, who have different skills, who have different information or perspectives, what we're hoping is that we're not just going to add those things up. We're hoping that, having these differences is going to create something that's more than the sum of its parts. And we see that, on great sports teams. We see it in great musical albums. I talk a lot about the 2008 men's Olympic basketball team, USA men's basketball team. I talk a lot about one of my favorite albums, Kind of Blue, by Miles Davis, and the rest of the group. I don't want to not give them credit. So synergy is this phenomenon that is real, it's desirable, but it's hard to find. And it's hard to find because there's a lot of very natural forces in groups that are kind of working against it. And the biggest and most famous of those would be social loafing, or better known as free riding, where when we're part of a group, when we see other people are accountable for the same outcome, we don't try quite as hard as we otherwise would. Even when we don't need to see other people working on it, we just believe that somebody else is also working on it. We just, our brain wants us to conserve energy for other stuff. And it says, hey, this is probably going to get taken care of, so I'm not going to try as hard. And that as leaders, we're always fighting this natural tendency of people to say, oh, there's kind of a diffusion of responsibility here. I'm not going to give everything I can. So synergy is important, but it's also something that can be really hard as a leader to get to.
Well, how important, as if I have a group of people and I'm trying to turn them into a team, how important is the structure in achieving synergy?
I mean, structure is really the king of all the things you can do as a leader. So if, like you said, there's so many times where it feels like we're given these messages from movies or from the things we really see leaders doing and remember, like these motivational speeches. You always see the great pregame speech or the great halftime speech. And that's what, we get shown. Now we get shown it on TV, but certainly that's a part in the movies or TV shows when we think about the great team leader, that's what they're going to do. But those are far less important than the structure of the group. And it's not really even close. So the first thing you have to do is think about, what is this team for? What's our goal going to be? Why are we assembling a team in the first place? What do we want to achieve? And we need to get that as clear as we can in our own minds so we can communicate it to other people. And that there's a lot of tricky things about that. I talk in the book about how the more important the goal is, often the more abstract it is and the harder it is to make it clear to everyone else. So if I want to say I want to, have a group that's charged with trying to create world peace, well, that's great. That sounds like a big important goal, but it's not very concrete. It's very, very difficult to get everyone aligned on what that's going to mean, what we're actually going to do as a group. So there's a lot of challenges there that I talk about in more detail. But so we need to know what we're trying to achieve. And then we go from there and say, well, what knowledge, skills, perspectives do I need to achieve that goal? And I need to compose a team that I make sure has those knowledge, skills, and perspectives. And this almost sounds so obvious that you would think it doesn't need saying, but I can't tell you how many organizations that's the problem, that they chose, who's available. They chose based on political considerations, and they didn't go, well, do we actually have the skills on this team that we need to accomplish the goal that we wanted to? And often the answer is no. And it's well, it's going to be really hard then.
Yeah. And I mean, I can't tell you how many times this happens. And so even reading this portion of it, I was going back to my time in charge or watching other people. And a couple things just came to light. Is one is, when you're the person in charge of an organization, and I'm sure it's the same in corporate America as it is in the military, so much stuff is happening all the time. There's so much noise, and we're moving so quickly. Especially in the military, where we have a bias towards action, we just jump right into something. And then all of a sudden, you may be days, weeks, even months into a project and realize that, like, you're having what you talk in the book about, process losses, just all this wasted energy, almost like you keep blowing up a balloon, but there's a hole in the balloon and the air just keeps coming out of it. And then, like, instead of just stopping a little bit and just saying, like, what is our goal here, like you said, and then building a team around it, which we would call task organizing for purpose. It 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 doesn't happen as much as it should. And the other part of it, and I've talked to several leaders on the podcast, is this idea of being the chief reminding officer if you're in charge. And that's constantly over communicating why we're here, what we're doing, and what success looks like. And that was something I learned in command too, is like, I said things so many times. And what I learned is, like, it, as the leader, it seems obvious to you because you're the one who's intimately familiar with the problem. You're the one who really cares because everything rises and falls with you. And you just think it's intuitive for everybody on the team to know why we're here. And sometimes when you don't do that, I remember so many times I would forget that, and officers would come up to me and just be like, I don't get it. I don't understand. What are the priorities? And I would get frustrated because I'm like, duh. But it's intuitive. And I think this is a great time to talk about Coach K's speech to the Redeem team and kind of why that was so important.
Yeah. So I love that idea of a chief reminding officer. And it's completely consonant with the research that the main problem in teams when you see those process losses, those wasted effort, is that we've come apart a little bit on our understanding of where we're supposed to be headed. And that even very small deviations in different people's minds of what the goal looks like, what success looks like, lead to wasted effort, right? Like that's going to happen. And so the best leaders they say the goal over and over and over. Every time it's at the top of a memo in an email that you send, or it's at the end, you say it at the beginning of meetings. So I love the chief reminding officer idea. I think that's great. And sorry, I forgot what the question was after that.
Yeah, we were talking about, I was asking you about the speech that Coach K gave to the Redeem team.
Yeah, so the speech that Coach K gave to the Redeem team is one of my favorite examples of a real sports coach coming in and checking the boxes on what we want in a launch speech, in communicating the purpose and vision of this team, and to really making sure everyone's aligned with that vision. And what I like about Coach K's speech, and you can find this on YouTube, it's pretty readily available, is it's not a super fiery speech, right? He's not coming in there and trying to get everybody all excited and hollering and leading cheers and stuff. It's very professional and understated. He's talking to, the greatest basketball players in the world who are all multimillionaires and at the top of their field. And he's telling them, we're all coming here to win a gold medal, but we're also coming here to make each other better. And I'm going to tell you exactly how we're going to, or that participating fully in this team, you're going to become a better basketball player. And you're going to, we're going to be asked in the long run, did you win? Did you win this gold medal or did you not? And that's going to be your legacy, whether you were coming off the bench, whether you were starting, whether you were scoring 20 points a game, or whether you were being more of a role player than you're used to being. And that this alignment around, what we're trying to do here and communicating why it's going to be important to you. So the elements here are a clear goal, win the gold medal. Why it's going to be important. First, it's going to be part of your legacy and people are going to ask you about it forever. But second, you're going to become a better basketball player. And that's what all these guys want. They want to compete against the best. They want to compete against themselves, and they're going to become better. And also, the third thing that you want to communicate is why it's going to be challenging. That our psychology is such that if we have a goal and we think it's going to be easy, we're kind of cognitively lazy. We don't try as hard as we otherwise could. So when you're communicating this clear goal, you want to say, hey, this isn't going to be easy. We're going to have to work hard. The rest of the world's gotten better in the case of this Olympic team. We're really going to have to challenge ourselves. And it was easy to convince them that year because they'd lost in the prior Olympics. But, that is a challenge for the U.S. men's Olympic basketball team, is to convince these guys that it's going to be a challenge sometimes. And so, it's the same for any leader, right? That we're clear goal, why it's going to be important to you, what's consequential about it, and what's going to be challenging about it. And if you check those 3 boxes in your initial communication, you're way ahead of most people.
And there's something else too from that, like you talk about the previous team. The coach was like, all right, let's get a yacht. We'll bring everybody together. This like fun, get to know each other exercise versus Coach K just diving right into the practices. And I was thinking about one of the best teams I was ever on. It was a very small team. And I had just shown up to this organization like a couple days before, I feel like. And we went out to California to a training center. And we planned together for like 7-8 days. And that was my first time like meeting people. And so we didn't do like a team building exercise where we all got together and, did all these other things. Like we planned an operation together over the course of the 7 days. Well, flash forward, we go out to the desert again 45 days later, and we're out there for weeks doing a simulated war. And this small team, we were so effective and we did things that we wouldn't normally do by the book. But it was because, as I reflect back and I read this book, and we had people who had been cast away, like the guy who would kind of sit in the corner of the office that nobody talked to. Like we figured out what his superpower was and brought that in to the team, and he was nothing like us. I'm pretty sure when he would look at people, he would see like the running green ones and zeros, like the Matrix. But he became like this. He carried aspects of the team that we couldn't just crack the nut on. And so, as I go back and look, I think that initial diving right in, getting focused on a task, was the thing that helped quickly solidify the team and prepared us for that larger training exercise a month later.
Yeah, I love that story too, because I think there's so many great things in there where obviously I'm somebody who studies teams. And when I tell people, here's what I do, a lot of people ask me about team building. And what people usually think of when they think of team building are these kind of, outdoor exercises where we're doing trust falls and we're trying to, tell each other our deepest, darkest secrets. And that's because people kind of misunderstand what kind of trust we need when we're going to work as a team. And of course, it's great if you and your teammates have what we would call relational trust, that we trust each other with our deepest, darkest secrets, that I believe you have my best interests at heart for, now and forever. That's terrific. But what we usually need in a team is work-based trust or task-based trust, that when I ask you to do something, you're going to do it to a standard that I can use, right? That you're gonna fulfill your role and you're gonna do your job, as Bill Belichick used to say, and then I don't have to compensate for the fact that you might not do your job because I trust that it's going to get done appropriately. And that kind of trust is the kind that makes teams perform better and makes synergy more likely. And the way you build that kind of trust isn't by telling each other your deepest, darkest secrets or doing trust falls. It's by seeing people do their job, that when I ask you to do something, hey, I can see how you did it. And then we can talk about if there was a problem, we can say, hey, that didn't work quite the way we wanted it to. How can we do it better next time? And that the more we do of that, the more we kind of build the actual trust we're going to need. And so that it's not that going out and doing these team building exercises is bad. It's fine. It's not really doing anyone any harm, but it's worse than spending your time doing high fidelity simulations. And honestly, the military is one of the best at doing these high fidelity simulations as a way of training people for a task. And when you look at other industries that are organized around teams, like sports, they spend way more time practicing than they do performing, right? It's not like there's way more training camp and practice than there is games. And yet in most organizations, that's not how we do teams. We just let them kind of go. We don't have these high fidelity learning simulations. And when we try and build the team, we focus too much of our attention on this kind of relational trust rather than task-based trust.
Yeah, and I think, going back to relational trust, I interviewed him a long time ago, and I'm trying to remember it right now, but a guy named Charles Feltman wrote a book called The Thin Book of Trust. And essentially, he says trust is not all or nothing. It's not black or white. Mm-hmm. It's actually, there's like four pillars, and I'm probably saying this wrong, but it's exactly what you're talking about. Is that when we trust somebody, there's four areas that build up that trust. It's relational, I think, is one. Competency is the other one. Reliability is the other one. And does the person, does their words match their actions, are really like the four areas. Yeah. And I think, when you get into work-based trust, the task-based trust, it's competency and reliability are the two things you're testing right there. And I think when you're in a high stakes situation, whether it's in the corporate world or in a training simulation or actual combat, to know, I think some of those other ones just kind of go out the window real quick. And it's, can I rely on this person, and are they competent? And, if those two things are there, you can do so much together as a team.
Yeah, absolutely. And that I think what's important too is that the relational trust isn't necessarily correlated with these other kinds of trust, right? So it's like, I've got people I love, my best friends, my family members. And if I were on a team with them doing something for my work, I don't trust them to do it. That the two don't necessarily have much to do with each other.
Right.
So, the investment at work in building a really purely kind of relational trust, like I said, it's nice, right? Like that's a nice to have, but I think people get the sort of causality in teamwork wrong when they're thinking, I'm going to do team building, and all I'm going to do in that team building is focus on everyone, kind of liking each other better and having more of this relational trust.
Yeah, well, I want to talk, a little bit now about the dark side of teams, like getting to the Harry Potter sorting hat. And I've seen this more and more. You can go online and see it, but it's this like vitriol that kind of happens, and we see it in the military too. You'll see an organization. There's a really there's a book called Black Hearts, which a lot of people read, which is about this unit during the Iraq War that did a lot of atrocious things. And it wasn't like a night and day switch. Like all of a sudden everybody woke up in the morning and started committing war crimes. It was this change in the norms over time that eventually solidified for this particular group of people. And so I want to talk about the dark side. And I think a great place to begin with that is the norms of the team.
Yeah, absolutely. That it's crazy how different norms can be within different groups, even sometimes in the same organization. And it sounds like this book was very much about that, right? Like especially when we get a little bit isolated from one another, the norms of any individual group start to kind of grow apart. And it's a gradual process. And what kind of drives that is conformity pressure. And it's not explicit conformity pressure where we're necessarily all saying, oh, you've got to do it this way. It's, again, this prehistoric part of our brain that just wants to fit in. that's saying, boy, it would be horrible if I get kicked out of this group. And again, the problem is that we don't even notice that prehistoric part of our brain's talking to us and saying, no, you better fit in, you better fit in, you better fit in. And so we start to, accept things as normal that we otherwise wouldn't. So social norms, are great tools of collaboration when they're used purposefully, right? If we had to make new decisions about how we're going to communicate, how we're going to collaborate all the time, and we didn't have anything that was the normal way we do it, it would be hard to get stuff done. So that, norms kind of lubricate the gears of our normal social interactions, how we greet each other, how we say goodbye, how much we tip, all these things kind of make our social lives easier. But norms also emerge from people that they're not always benign, right? So it's like, we often get norms that are dysfunctional. Sorry.
Yeah, can I pause you right there? Like,
yeah.
I didn't appreciate the norms of just, like if I go to, like, as soon as we get off here, I got to run to the grocery store. It's going to be very, like, I'm just going to walk in, I'm going to do my thing, I'm going to leave. But as we were talking right before the recording, I just last year moved back from living in Europe for 2 years. And there was like everything took effort, like going to a restaurant, going to the grocery store, getting on the train, like because I didn't know the norms. And you take it for granted if you don't travel much, or you just stay in like your country. And I know you living in London right now, I would imagine for you could probably relate to that too.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, with that, you don't realize how much easier your life norms are making things until you don't have them and you don't know them anymore. And that, so many norms are just kind of random, right? That like there's no rhyme or reason to the different greeting norms in different cultures, right? They're just kind of things that have evolved over centuries. And it's important that we greet each other and that every culture has a greeting norm, but they're not all the same. And it's kind of the same in other groups of like, in different work groups, what's okay to do and what's not okay to do may vary, but that usually we have norms about, how we're going to disagree, how we're going to make decisions, who's in charge, and what the kind of status hierarchy is. And that, so groups have certain kinds of norms, but what those norms are can really vary. And again, when we're not careful of them, they mostly favor conformity, and that they also favor, strangely, the most extreme people in the group. Because when we think about what's normal, it sounds like we're going to be like average in the middle when we think about normal. But when you think about who speaks the most in your group, who's the loudest, who cares the most, it's usually not the person who's right in the middle. It's the person who's a little further to one extreme or another. And that what happens is, because that person's talking more, because they're louder, we infer that that's actually what's normal in the group. And so then everybody's opinion, because we're trying not to get ostracized, consciously or unconsciously, moves a little closer to that person who we identify with. Coming back to your Seth Godin quote of, I'm in this group. I'm sorry, what was the quote one more time?
People like us do things like this.
Yeah, people like us do things like this, right? And this is it being kind of weaponized for not so good, where it's like, oh, I'm a people like us. I'm a people like this other guy who's really passionate and loud and maybe has an opinion a little bit more extreme than I do. And he says this is okay. So maybe it's okay. And then that process repeats over and over and over. And that the people who kind of agree with this dominant, louder position rise to power, sometimes at their worst, start enforcing these norms and suppressing dissent from them. And the group gets more and more extreme over time. And that's how we get, these small groups who sometimes commit war crimes, or sometimes quite large groups. And that's how we get cults. It's how we get all kinds of the sort of dysfunctions of group life that a lot of people associate when they think of, a term like groupthink. is this, bad conformity seeking tendency we have. And that's what's famous about groups rather than the kind of like positive, collaborative side of them.
I'd like to introduce you to our newest partner, Roger Bank, a modern digital military bank built by military members for military members. Whether you're stationed stateside or overseas, Roger is designed to meet the unique needs of our men and women in uniform. I recently opened an account myself, and the process was incredibly smooth. It took less than 10 minutes from start to finish. Now, here's why I'm excited to partner with Roger. They offer high-yield checking and savings accounts, zero account fees, early payday, and automatic savings with Roundup Match. Their military-ready direct deposit form is even auto-populated and signed by the CEO, saving you time and hassle. Plus, you get free global ATM access, real person customer support, and they even offer accounts for service members as young as 17. Funds are FDIC insured through Citizens Bank of Edmond, so you can bank with confidence and peace of mind. Visit roger.bank to learn more. That's ROGER.bank. Again, going back to books and then stuff I've seen, like Todd Henry talks about ghost rules, which are essentially norms. And so it's that a social pressure that goes in there. And one of the worst ones that we've had in the military is that you're going to work late. You're going to sit in the office 6, 7 o'clock at night. And that is a sign that you are a high performing individual. And I would imagine that that began with, people who were on the extreme side of it, like work till it's done. And two, maybe those same people weren't as efficient. And so all of a sudden it starts driving the culture. And as a leader, like if you're not careful and you don't call that out to say, hey, we're not going to do that. Like I found myself for 2 years having to kick people out of the office because that norm was so strong in my organization.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, especially these kind of norms that emerged from times where the demands of the task and what sometimes even what the organization was all about may have been different. So I'm the director of our PhD program at University College London and School of Management, and it's the same thing. The norm is PhD students are supposed to show that they're working hard by being in the office and working late. And I'm constantly trying to kick them out. If it were only 6 or 7, I would be grateful. I wouldn't have to kick them out nearly as much. But it's a different world. Like they don't need to be there. Their supervisors aren't there half the time. If they want to work, they could easily be at home. It's not helping anyone at this point,
right,
for them to necessarily be coming in the office. Yet it's this kind of vestige of an older world where, most PhD norms come from when you needed to be in a physical lab where there was equipment and stuff. But in management research, we, rarely need that kind of thing. So they're just kind of like these functionless norms that have emerged, and they still carry this social meaning, but that social meaning is now misaligned with what we know about humans and the demands of our current world.
And another thing that I think about too, which again I've seen in organizations, and I've been a part of organizations that have tried to stamp it out. But like when you start allowing people, in meetings and stuff to just put down other people, to make derogatory jokes, towards members of the opposite sex, or about race, anything like that. And I think it's small steps. So it's one joke in a meeting becomes 2 jokes in the next one, becomes somebody putting a slide up as part of a formal meeting that puts somebody down. And again, it's if we're not paying attention to how we interact with the group, we will find ourselves moving closer and closer to one side. And at least in my experience, something explodes at some point, whether it's intergroup conflict or somebody gets in trouble, but it never ends well.
Absolutely. And I mean, I think there are some things I would encourage leaders to have very little tolerance for personal attributions where you're saying like, Joe, you're the kind of person who, and then saying something bad after that. Like they're like that automatically is something that's going to be less helpful than talking about the current situation, talking about behavior, talking about the task. So it's fine for us to give each other feedback about, hey, when you did this, here's how that impacted me. Here's why that made my job harder. That's all good. But you're the kind of person who is something I would always have zero tolerance for, because that will quickly spiral into relationship conflict. And similarly, when people are driving wedges between people on often demographic differences, but often it could be something else as well, where we're trying to say like there are these subgroups within our main group, and they're doing it in a way that, like the sorting hat, is driving this wedge in the middle of the group. That's almost always going to be bad. And that's something that we should be very attuned to and have norms against rather than norms in favor of. And that is where leadership does matter, that somebody's got to step up and call that out. It's a lot easier for the people with formal authority to do it, but it's also something that other people in the group can bring up, depending on how psychologically safe, as we would say, it is in that group for people to speak up, to ask questions, to make suggestions about different ways of behaving.
And I want to clarify something you just said too. You mentioned psychological safety. And I think a lot of us think that means that everything in the group is going to be easy, but that's not the case at all, is it?
No. So psychological safety, no, it's absolutely not. That really psychologically. So I'll first start. Psychological safety is the feeling or the climate in the group where you think you can take interpersonal risks, things like making mistakes, asking questions, making suggestions that challenge the status quo. And when I do that, I'm not going to get ostracized by the group. And that's what the safety part is. Now, I have a lot of students who have the same misconception that, oh, that's going to be a group that they really, they're in great harmony and they're getting along really great. But it's actually the opposite quite often, that these are groups that are comfortable disagreeing with one another, that are comfortable making suggestions that keep challenging the status quo. And that's what makes psychological safety so important. Not that we're in harmony and we all get along, or at least we have the appearance of all agreeing and getting along. It's that we have the safety to disagree. And that's when groups push each other to make better decisions, to come up with better ideas, to surface learning and capabilities that they didn't know they had, is when they challenge each other in that way. And it's actually the most psychologically unsafe groups that often have this kind of fake harmony on top of them, because everyone's afraid to rock the boat so much and to challenge each other that nobody does it.
Yeah, and I found that like that's a lot of times that becomes the go-to, that becomes the go-to. And again, it's I think it's a job of the leader of the group or the team or whatever, to not only foster that, but to again, to kind of keep their finger on the pulse of the group. And so when you start seeing task conflict turn into relational conflict, is to quickly shut it down and redirect everybody to a different way. Because otherwise, you end up you have a ton of group dysfunction and a lot of process loss for way unnecessary drama. And I've seen it time and time again. And I think it goes back to, if I could kind of sum up your book, is that this stuff doesn't happen. The group dynamics kind of happen, I guess, automatically. But that doesn't mean that you're in control of it. That could go either way. It could go to dysfunction or to synergy. But I think as a leader, if we just take a step back, we get a lot more deliberate about the teams that we're leading. We focus on the process, the goals, the structure of the team. And then, as one of our past guests, General Donahue, said, fight for our culture every single day by being deliberate and paying attention to the norms, that we can achieve the great things that you talk about in the book and some of the best teams that you cover. It just doesn't happen automatically. It's going to go one way or the other. It's just, are you going to direct it as the leader?
Yeah, I think that's a great summary. It's there's these invisible forces that are directing our behavior in certain directions. And what, kind of what keeps me in business is that most people ignore these forces and just kind of let them push them around in whatever direction they're going to, rather than being really strategic and purposeful about trying to get the wind blowing in a particular direction that's the direction you want to be going. And, groups, people are complicated. Everybody who's been a leader or manager or even just worked in a team knows that other people are unpredictable and it's hard to get on the same page and cooperate consistently. And, even if you're married or you're in a long-term relationship, the same thing, right? It's work, it's communication, it's an ongoing process. And I think too many things, in leadership and in management, we treat them like they're problems that they're going to be solved, right? That I've got a problem with my team. I'm going to, do X and Y, and then it's going to be gone. And it's inherent in being in teams that like we have individual needs that are sometimes going to be in conflict with collective needs, right? Like for the collective, it would be good if we all, work as hard as we possibly could every day and burn ourselves out after a while, maybe depending on the group. Like there's times the group demands things from us that aren't in our own individual interests. And that's just part of group life, that sometimes there's a give and take between our interests, but we do our best to keep them aligned. And likewise, we, humans want autonomy, that we don't like feeling controlled by these forces of group dynamics. We don't feel like we're being kind of coerced into conforming. And yet there's a little bit of that in every group. And so there's always going to be this push and pull that we're managing every day between individual and collective goals, between conformity and autonomy. And that's part of group life. It's a paradox that we manage all the time, not a problem that we solve.
So this would be a great place to close the episode, but I want to add like a bonus track to it. I've been really interested lately, and something I'm studying, something I'm writing about, is the effects of power on people and the effects of power on character. And you touch a little bit on your book, but it's a very quick pass through. And so this thing I've been thinking about is the importance of the people we surround. Like when you have power, when you're in charge, the importance of the people you surround yourself with. And, I go back to the ancient world, and I think of, one of the most famous tyrants who's now forgotten was Dionysius, the tyrant of Syracuse. And there was even a phrase that they had back then, which was called the Syracusean tables. And what it meant was that the people who sat at his table were a lot of grifters, a lot of people who drank with him, who were, whatever he said was the smartest thing. There's even a vignette of when he started losing his eyesight, the people who were around him at that table started bumping into things too, just to like, just again, because it was like sycophancy to the extreme. And so I'm, as I'm researching, I'm trying to, again, convey to people that it's not necessarily power that corrupts. It's that the people around you who will constantly agree with you, who will never push back at you, who are more interested in your self-image than, you actually being a good leader, are the ones who end up, kind of pushing your character because of these group dynamics. I just want to know if you have any final thoughts on that.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a really important observation, because like one of the main things everyone has power over is who they spend time with, right? Who surrounds you, who do you listen to for advice, who don't you listen to? And so every leader has this ability, and that as you get access to formal power, to more resources and things like that, that intensifies, right? The kind of people who are going to want to get closer to you for their own interest, by flattering you, by, for the point of grift or something else, is going to go up. There's going to be more demand to be close to you. And so you have to be that much more aware and cautious about who you're letting into your orbit, who you're listening to, and who you're surrounding yourself with than you otherwise would. And I mean, obviously the classic example of this would be Abraham Lincoln and his team of rivals, where he purposely selected people who disagreed with him for his cabinet. And, this is such a sort of apocryphal story because it's so rare, right? Like that if this had happened again after Abraham Lincoln, it would be a lot, we wouldn't keep telling the Abraham Lincoln story. So it's a really hard thing to do, to pick people who are going to disagree with you, to encourage them to disagree with you, and to keep having these discussions, because it's tiring, right? Like that's a tiring way to live as a leader, but that it is a really important thing to let these contrasting perspectives, let people who are going to challenge you into your bubble, into your sphere of influence, and to really try to understand the information and the perspectives that they're coming with and telling you. And that, again, only happens with psychological safety. But I do want to touch on where you started with this power corrupts idea. And it's obviously, that's not destiny, that power is going to corrupt everybody. But there is a lot of psychological research that shows when you have more formal power, which usually means, there's more people who are underneath you, who you're supervising or have some kind of influence over, you will view each individual more abstractly. The more people that you are responsible for, the more kind of general you have to be about them, and the harder it is to individuate each one of them. And that phenomenon, which is what we call psychological distance, and power is one of the main ways you can get more psychologically distant from other people, leads you to treat them less like other humans and more like objects or tools. And so this is something that's going to happen when you're making big decisions that affect, tens or hundreds or thousands of people. You have to be more abstract about how you think about those people. And that's going to sometimes lead you to dehumanize them. And that's something we really have to fight when we get in control of more and more people, is to have constant reminders that these are human beings. And that often means going and directly interacting with these people who are on the front lines of your organization, the people who you're making decisions for, and to connect to them as other humans. And when we don't do that, and if we don't do that for really long periods of time, and I'm sure we all can think of examples of leaders who seem like they're doing this, we're not going to treat them as well. And that's a lot of where this idea that power corrupts kind of comes from, is the people who start to think of other people more abstractly, like they're tools, like they're not humans, and they never come back down to view them as concrete other human beings who deserve the dignity and respect that any other human deserves.
I love that, Colin. That was a great bonus track, hidden track to this episode. Well, I appreciate your time today. I've been talking about your book a lot lately, especially to my friends who are still in the Army leading teams. And I was like, this is the book I wish I would have read before I got in charge of a group of people as a major, because it's the science behind how to do it well and how to be very deliberate. So again, thanks for writing it. Awesome book, easily readable. You can do it right before you record a podcast. And I appreciate your time today.
Okay. Thanks so much, Joe. It was a lot of fun. Thanks so much for inviting me.
Thank you again for listening to another episode of From the Green Notebook podcast. If you enjoyed the show, please give us 5 stars wherever you listen to podcasts. It helps us gain visibility and the opportunity to help more people on their leadership journey. Also, make sure you check out our website at www.fromthegreennotebook.com. There, you can listen to past episodes, read leadership articles written by military leaders from around the world. You can sign up for our monthly reading list email where you can learn about new books that are coming out, and our Sunday reflection email that comes out every Sunday morning. Is really short. It's a 2-minute read, but I guarantee you it's going to start your week off on the right foot. Finally, make sure you follow us on Twitter at FTGN Notebook, and you can find us on Instagram and Facebook by searching for From the Green Notebook. Again, thank you so much for coming on this journey with us. I am humbled by the opportunity to learn these lessons alongside you. So please join us next week for another episode of From the Green Notebook, where we're going to help you lead with the best version of yourself.
I came from the mud. There's dirt on my hands. Strong like a tree. There's roots where I stand. Oh, I've been running from the